Hello, students. I'm here to talk about the second half of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. The last time we looked at the first couple sections, and I did a kind of an overview of the poem. For this session, what I'd like to do is focus in on the climax of the poem, as I like to call it. It's kind of strange. The poem is in 7 parts, and the climax really comes at the end of part 4. Parts 5 and 6 allow Coleridge to get into some metaphysical speculation and not a lot of action. And then part 7 brings the mariner back to land for the first time and sets him up on his journey as this eternal itinerant person who has to tell his story to other people when he meets the person that has a certain look on his face. But to recap, part of the reason the Rime of the the reason the mariner's in trouble in part 4 of the poem is in part 3 there's been a game of dice, and through that game of dice, death and life and death are rolling dice in order to win the souls of all the seamen on board, and death loses, so death gets all the seamen except for the Rime of the Ancient, gets all the seamen except for the Ancient Mariner, who is won by life and death, and she specifically chooses him. The concept of life and death is one that's central to this poem and central to Romanticism. Wordsworth was writing about life and death in poems like Tintern Abbey, when he talks about being pent up in the city and away from nature and the natural spirit, the universal spirit that he can connect to in the natural world that he can't as easily connect to in the urban environment. But life and death, I think, goes beyond environment. Life and death is this concept that it's a little bit like the living dead, like zombies. And in our culture, it's interesting that zombies have become so popular in literature, at least pop literature and pop culture and movies and TV series, because I think it indicates a fear. It's almost like a mythic representation or a Jungian archetype of the zombie, the person who's not really living their life as a fully engaged existence, not living an authentic life, but living a life that is just going through the motions, living a life that has no deeper meaning, living a life that has no sense of joy, transcendence, suffering, but suffering for a purpose, suffering for an end, suffering for improvement. Life and death is almost like the condition of the modern man, 20th century man, in the idea of the existentialist tradition of there being no meaning except what the individual can bring to it. To me, life and death is a problem that Romanticism saw with urban society in general, and urbanization, industrialization. We've talked about Marxist alienation of workers from their goods and from the other workers and from society in general. That's what life and death is. I mean, just think of somebody working a conveyor belt in a factory. That kind of job is mind-numbing, soul-destroying. So we use some of these terms, in everyday usage. And that's what the Ancient Mariner has, and life and death. So life and death is the point